I'm going to ask you for patience at the start, because the way a story begins matters, especially when you need strangers to believe you. If my voice shakes, it's not the whiskey. It's the sky darkening over the tin roofs again. When the clouds gather this low over the hills, my ribs remember, my hands remember, and I remember an old man who tried to warn me before the first downpour of the season. I'm American. My name is Daniel Mercer. 41 years old this summer, I flew down to Nicaragua. I had a useful degree, a middling student loan balance, and the kind of idealism that makes you say yes when a nonprofit asks whether you can organize a mental health program in a city most of your friends can't find on a map. The place was Estelí, North Country tobacco town where the mountains fold in on themselves, where the rainy season is not a polite guest. I rented a concrete room with a rattling fan and a roof that clattered like dice whenever water hit it. At the clinic, my days were practical. Triage in the morning, sorting through what hurt and how long. Afternoons spent with people whose pain had no names in the forms we handed out. The local physicians were competent with broken bones and machete lacerations. They were less eager to sit in a chair and ask, "When did the nightmares start?" I became the counselor, not because I was brilliant, but because I kept the door shut and listened, and because I could say buenos without sounding like I was mocking them. If you are American, you'll understand what I mean. It takes work to speak softly in someone else's house. The old man didn't want to come in. His daughter, broad-shouldered and impatient, tugged him by the sleeve until he tripped over the threshold and stared at the floor like it was a stranger. Nurse Carla handed his intake form to me with a look that said, "This one is yours." His name, she whispered, was Evaristo. In the countryside, they called him Don Evaristo. In the city, men like him were campesinos, hill people, patient with rain and blunt with words. I asked if he preferred the door open. He nodded. I asked if he slept. He winced, then said yes and no. He spoke like a man who had carried a sack of rocks up the mountain and could not put it down because it was tied to his shoulders. "What brings you here, Don Evaristo?" I asked. He stared at the window. "La lluvia," he said. "The rain." The rainy season was still 2 weeks off. We knew it because the air grew sweet and then sour in the late afternoons. Because vendors in the market started selling cheap plastic ponchos again. And because every Esteliano could look at the sky and tell you what hour the first storm would come. Still, I didn't understand. "The rain?" I repeated. He rubbed his hands like he was trying to start a fire in his palms. "When it rains, I see like another one sees." I waited. Silence is useful where questions bruise. "In my dreams," he said finally. "Not like usual dreams, where you are watching yourself from behind. No, I am in it. And I am big. I go slow through the trees. I hear the leaves, the drops. My hands are hair. My fists are heavy." He lifted one of his own, old and slender. "When it rains, I am inside something that is not me." He stopped. His daughter shifted her weight in the doorway, as if she had heard this already and was tired of hearing it again in a room that smelled of bleach. "Does it only happen when it rains?" I asked. "Only then," he said, "and it is closer each time." "Closer to what?" He swallowed. "To my house." He would not say anything more. When I tried to circle back sleep hygiene, daily stressors, grief excused himself like a man who had never learned the practice of wasting someone else's time. His daughter answered my clerk's questions in the hall, thanked me, and left with him into the pale noon. I told myself a dozen sensible things. He was grieving some old loss. He suffered from parasomnias. He may have been drinking. The mind made monsters when the body forgot how to rest. I am a listener. Yes, but I am also American enough to trust my tool's intake forms. Structured interviews. Checklists that promise if you tick enough boxes, you will land on the truth. Then, a week later, Carla found me between the pharmacy and the back corridor and said, very quietly, "He called." She put an old cell phone in my hand. We didn't run phones through the clinic for patient calls. Too much gossip. Too much that could be misunderstood, but she had a soft spot and a memory like a ledger. "Play it," she said. The voice on the message was a ragged thread. I dreamed again. Not me. Him. I saw through him. I saw my house. It is close now. It is coming. It is hunting me. For God's sake, help me. "What day?" I asked. 3 days ago," she said. "He hasn't called back." "Do you have his number?" I asked. It was against the clinic rules to use our personal phones for patient calls. I used mine anyway. No answer. No answer again. The third time, someone lifted and set the phone down like they hadn't meant to pick it up at all. That was enough to dress my idealism in urgency. I found Diego, a driver with a bus route that could get me near the community where Don Evaristo lived, and climbed aboard with a backpack, a bottle of water, and a half-legal blister pack of Lodos Valium. Say what you want about me. I didn't plan to medicate him into obedience. I planned to put the panic at arm's length so he and I could talk. The bus out of Estelí rode like the spine of a dinosaur, vertebrae grinding over washboard roads. Every jolt pressed me into the person beside me, a teenager with a baseball cap who studied my face like he'd never seen one exactly like it. Outside, the hills shrugged up and up. Inside, whistles and jokes and plastic bags of sliced mango more fragrant than any fruit I'd bought in the States. We got off the highway onto a dirt road full of stones, and, beyond that, a footpath sticky with clay. By the time we saw the first clapboard houses, my calves burned like I'd walked out of an air-conditioned movie theater into a kiln. Women squatted at the wash basins, hands glossy with soap suds. Dogs navigated the mud as if it were a language they knew, and I did not. I found the daughter at a water barrel. "I came to check on your father," I said, turning my Spanish into something polite. "He went up," she said, "to the shack." She motioned toward the darker green, where trees climbed the slope like old men. "He will not come down until harvest." I know what courage looks like in a clinic. It is the person who shows up. What I did that afternoon wasn't courage. It was an American instinct dressed in missionary clothes, the assumption that if I put my hands on a problem, I could take it apart. By the time I found the shack, thunder was already organizing itself into a plan. The door stood open. I told myself that this was normal. Doors in the countryside breathe. Households are porous on purpose. "Don Evaristo?" I called. The room beyond the threshold was 1 room wide and 1 room deep, bare as a closed fist. A hammock slung between 2 posts lay collapsed on the dirt, one end torn down. The rope frayed so badly I could pull it apart with my fingers. A chipped table lay on its side. Chairs had been thrown and landed whichever way gravity instructed. Ashes extended beyond the stones that contained them, charcoaling a semicircle near the doorway, and in the pine board beside the door 3 fingernails, torn clean off and buried in the wood like the smallest gravestones you've ever seen. The machete had been thrown so hard into the wall that I had to lean my weight back and yank 3 times before it came free. When I looked at it, I saw what men do when they have no more arguments left and only the simplest tool in the world. The blade had a break near the tip, like a good knife left too long in a fire. The first drops of rain tapped the tin. I stepped outside because the walls had too many stories to tell, and I could only hold one at a time. The rain was not polite. It was sudden and everywhere at once. A sheet from the sky across the slope, and then the ground began its work of turning water into rivers. When you stand at the mountain's edge in a downpour, you realize gravity isn't law. It's appetite. I could not go down. I could barely see 10 feet into the gray. The path I'd climbed would be a sluice by now, slick as soap. So I did the only practical thing. I closed the door and shoved the bent table against it. I found a nail and a split piece of board. I wedged the broken machete near to hand. I listened. That is the part people don't tell. They will tell you about the flash and the fear, not about the 10 minutes in which nothing happens and your stomach finds a new position in your body to occupy. The sound that changed the room was not big. A twig breaking behind the shack. Another to the left. The texture of the rain altered around the edges, as if something taller than a man parted the downpour into different shapes. I stood in the doorframe, staring into the wet blur between the trees. Lightning fissured the sky and, for an instant, the slope was a photograph, every leaf individual. And in that stark cutout of light, I saw a silhouette that did not belong to any story I had yet told myself. A figure much taller than the men I know. Shoulders thick without being swollen. Arms that dropped toward its knees. Hair matted as if the rain itself could not find a comb through it. It did not sway. It did not posture. The lightning closed again, and the world went back to gray and sound. I did not breathe. A minute. Then two. The rain ticked on the roof. The plastic over the woodpile rattled. I thought, if I reach for the machete, I will not be fast enough, and I will die trying. I thought, if I break eye contact, it will come. Another stick snapped. This one closer to the door and to the right. I flinched and then cursed myself for having a reflex. As if human bodies weren't built by the same contractor. The door trembled. Something tested it with weight that was not human. The table skidded. The bolt bent. The second strike knocked one hinge half out and left a dent in the soft wood that did not resemble any hand I had seen. Only force expressing itself in the geometry available. And then silence that was not silence. The rain changed again. Lightning. Moving off east. The roof sounded less angry. Whatever was on the other side of the door exhaled in a low register and stepped back. Please. I whispered to a god I debate in better weather. Please let the rain stop. The rain stopped. Not like a switch, but like a tired thing finally done. The world kept dripping for a while. Of course, the trees stored water like gossip, but the sky had made its decision. I did not sleep. That is a lie I might tell if I wanted to sound braver than I was. The human body sleeps when it can. The human mind fails at its own orders. Sometime in the late hours when the clouds thin and men with better training call it morning, I slid into a dream and the world put me inside an animal. I was not watching myself. I was seeing through another's eyes. And that other was too close to the ground to be a man. I moved like a heavy thing that has learned to move quietly. The water ran off leaves and into my hair, and I could feel each bead like a new thought. I put a hand broad, furred, black with rind on the trunk of a tree and wrapped my fingers until they met. The tree groaned but did not give. I climbed, and the big muscles along my sides pulled me up easy, and I put my face into the wet wind and saw the slope and the shack and beyond it. To the north, a city with streetlights and muffled horns and cheap bars where men like me rest between one kind of duty and another. Estelí. Mine. I woke with a noise I have never made before. A child's voice in a grown man's throat. I was in the shack again. Floor dirt cold. Blade in my hand. And dawn colorless at the edges. The path down was mud. But it was passable. I ran like children run, without the dignity of adults. I fell once, twice, and learned what the word bruise means in a language without synonyms. An older woman pulled me into her house and put a towel in my hands. Because kindness is a habit here, she asked after Don Evaristo. I tried to speak, and the words fell off the front of my mouth. She told me later that I looked like a man who had seen a spirit and realized his own body was only rented. Back in Estelí, men had already moved the morning along. Shops lifted their metal grates. A boy with a soccer ball made a field of a parking lot. Carla was already standing by the clinic's side door with a question written on her face. I shook my head. She asked no more. You think this is the end of what I have to say? You are American and you want endings neat enough to fold into a drawer. So was I? Instead, the first afternoon thunder pealed over the roofs. And with it came the second dream. Then the third. Then the fourth. Each one nearer. Each one putting me inside that thing's balance and breath while it moved across ground that my own 2 feet had worn. I told no one. I kept working. People handed me their suffering, and I put it into words that fit on lines and in boxes. When it rained, I closed my door and did not look at the hills. When it did not rain, I pretended to be a man whose life belongs to himself. There are men in our country who call this cowardice. They prefer to fling their fear in public like a hat into a ring. But I am telling you the truth. I kept my head down because I thought to look up would invite something down from the sky. It took a week for that to stop working. The storm that afternoon was the kind we would have called biblical back home. The kind that makes the streets into quick canals and the power flicker twice before retiring for the night. I sat on my bed and watched a line of ants carry a crumb under the door. Then I slept like a man in a boat. In the dream, I moved so easily that I thought I might be discovering some new kindness in myself. The rain honored me. That was what the feeling was, that the world had stood still so that I could go where I wished without question. I climbed again, and the tree bark rasped against my palms, and the city pulled itself closer. The roofs were close enough to count. The soccer field with its rusted goal posts. The plaza. The church tower shouldering the water like a soldier. I woke with my mouth open in the middle of a sentence I could not remember. The room had grown dimmer. The storm wasn't a guest anymore. It was a resident. I washed my face. I picked up my backpack and put in it the things men pack when they are afraid they might need to build a choice very quickly. A pocket knife. A coil of paracord. A lighter. Aspirin. A rosary someone's grandmother had pressed into my hand weeks ago. A clean shirt. The machete I had brought home. Because I am sentimental about tools, I slid to a ridiculous gesture until you consider what else I had. If you are American, you expect me to call someone. The police. The mayor. My mother. I called no one. I am telling you this because I do not want you to learn the wrong lesson. That authority rescues us from the physics of what we ignore. I went out into the rain. Estelí at night in storm season is a set of corridors under corrugated awnings. The market women shorten their tables and go home early. The men inside bars lean forward toward their dominoes. The church at the plaza holds its doors open even when there is no service so that the wet have somewhere that is not their home to stand in and be dry. I did not have a plan. Plans are for men who make a list before they leave the house and come home with everything but the thing they went out to buy. I had only this. If the thing came for me, it would come now, and I would either learn something I could use or I would be another lesson for someone else to ignore. The first sign was as ordinary as most disasters. The way the rain along the plaza's eastern edge stopped behaving like rain. It gathered and then parted as if the air were a zipper. I stood under the arcades with a handful of other late people. One of them was a boy, maybe 12, who watched the street with ferocious concentration, as if it might tell him who he would become. A shadow put its weight where the light should have been. It is difficult to describe something tall without cheapening it. You think giant, Sasquatch, ogre. You think in fairy tale units. This wasn't that. This was an animal that had grown because the world it moved through had grown a distance between the trees down from the mountain. The height of a door that surrenders to the shoulders that know how to enter. It stepped from the alley as if it owned the alley and the space above it. Hair clotted by water. Hands like small paddles. Fingers not clever enough to do work, but designed to crush what needed crushing. Someone screamed. The boy did not. He held his breath, and I held mine with him, because we both were the kind of person who wants to see the thing that hurts us. It did not look at him. It looked at me. If you want to imagine that, imagine a meniscus of water across the space between you and something that sees you more clearly than you have ever been seen. It took one step toward the arcade and then stopped. The rain did not fall beneath the archway. It boomed on the roof above us. But the stone under us remained dry except for the river that had already invaded. The creature put its hand out, palm down. The air under the arch refused it. It wasn't ordinary physics, not a wall, not effort. It was like you or I walking into a cathedral and realizing there is a line between the threshold and the nave that your shoes do not cross because your body has learned another kind of respect. If I had been a better man, I would have told everyone to run. But if I had been a better man, I would not have been here at all. The thing circled. It could not enter while the roof kept the rain from striking its skin. It could circle and find the opening and come in from a different angle. I understood then what the shack had meant. Thresholds are bargains, not guarantees. I stepped out from under the arch. The boy grabbed my sleeve and I shook him off because sometimes the small brave thing is the wrong thing to do. The rain hit my face and the creature took 2 sure steps forward because the world had become a floor again. Come on. Then, I said, because words are armor when you have already decided how you will die. You want me to tell you I had a clever trap? Some American ingenuity. I had something worse and truer, an idea about time. In the mountains, the rain had ended. The thing had withdrawn. In the city, the rain under a roof was absence. The thing could not cross it. Not a wall. A clock. What if I could force that clock faster? The church bell tower had a lightning rod. I had seen the copper cable on its way down to the soil. A bright vein in the stone. The plaza was a shallow dish of water already. If I could get the creature to stand in it. If I could convince the sky to talk to the rod in a language it already spoke. If I could introduce the creature to current and the creature were enough like the world, everything else obeyed. Perhaps the bargain would end not because the rain stopped, but because the body did. You are American. You worry about the boy. Good. That means your good instincts survived your cynicism. I yelled at him to go. He did not. He watched. That will matter later. Because witnesses are the only reason some stories become laws. I walked into the plaza and the creature's attention moved as if it were a dog and I were meat. It stepped forward and the water around my shins threw itself against my legs. The thing put its hand out again. Palm open. No longer testing the edge of a roof, but the edge of me. I backed toward the base of the bell tower. Each step I took, it took. Each time the lightning coughed without committing. I felt my plan collapse like wet paper. The cable was where I remembered it. Bolted to the stone. Fat and green as if the metal itself had learned patience. I did not have tools for this. I had a pocket knife and the thought that maybe a man's will counts for more than it should in moments like these. The bolt wasn't coming off. The cable didn't need to. I uncoiled the paracord and tied it around the creature's wrist when it came close enough. Because it did not understand rope the way men do. I had tied the other end to the copper a moment before. While the creature watched my hands like children watch a magician. I have no good explanation for why it allowed me that. It is possible I am lying to myself now about how close it let me get. Bend down. I whispered to the sky. Thunder answered. And then lightning drove a rod into the bell tower so hard that the world lost all other sound. The current went where current goes. The cable howled without a voice. The paracord smoked. I stood in water to my knees and felt the kind of force doctors talk about when they do not wish to scare their patients. The creature's body convulsed once and then, not poetically but accurately, failed. I do not know how my heart kept itself honest. I do not know why I did not fall. When I opened my eyes, the creature lay awkward as a fallen ladder. One arm still wrapped in the rope. the rain flattening its hair until it looked like grass. The boy had not run. He stood with his fists at his sides. His face was not triumphant. It was solemn in a way I have seen in men who hold their breath underwater to see how long they can. Behind him, men and women advanced by degrees, like the plaza were a lake that might take them. A policeman with a poncho tried to ask me something and then saw the body and forgot his questions. It was not a man. I want that said. People can turn anything into a man when they want to forgive something. This was animal. It had a rib cage and a pelvis and a skull and hands with 5 digits each. Yes, but I have seen hundreds of hands, and these were made for striking, not for doing. The fur was knotted in strips like a net they had cut themselves free from. The boy asked, "Is it dead?" I answered like a man in a witness box. "It is." I sat down because I had to, and the rain spent itself until it ran out of reasons. The plaza emptied into gutters and then into the deeper darkness under the streets. The police put tape around the body because tape makes people feel that order has resumed. Carla found me under the arcade. I had left a note at the clinic. She did not scold me. She did not say I had broken rules or been reckless. She put her hand on the back of my head the way you calm a child and let it rest there until I remembered how to swallow. "Do you want to go to the hospital?" she asked. "No," I said. "Do you want to go home?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. Men with pale faces arrived the following day from the capital with measurements and questions. They took the body. They did not tell us what they would call it. That was fine with me. Some things end when you name them, and some things begin. I slept each night after that like a man permitted to. When it rained, which it did a dozen times more that season, I did not dream. The tree in my body had lost its branches. I went back to work. People continued to bring me their suffering, and I continued to stack it carefully so that none fell off the sides. The boy came to the clinic one afternoon and sat on the curb until I finished for the day. "Why didn't it come out until the rain?" he asked. "My mother says it was a demon." "I don't know," I said, "because I will not lie to a child who has already seen a person choose one kind of death over the others. Some things grow in water. Some things needed to move. That doesn't make them holy." "Are you going to leave?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. He considered that as if it were a chess move that might work a few moves from now and nodded. Then he went back to whatever boys do in storm season. If the story ended there, you could put it in a drawer. But in our country, we love to argue about what counts as violence and what counts as justice. And we are clumsy at both. A rumor started, as rumors do, that I had lured the creature to the church with promises or prayers or a trick. That what I had killed was not a threat, but a test. Another rumor held that I had used the lightning like a thief uses a lock, and that my victory was not clean, and that men should not teach the sky new tricks. A week later, a woman whose child I had once helped find words for grief stood in the clinic doorway and told me something simple and terrible. Don Evaristo did not come home. I knew that already. No body had been found in the hills. No shirt, no shoe, no machete tip. But a fact feels different when it breaks the air in a room where people come to practice breath. "What do you think happened to him?" she asked. I am American, and Americans fit facts into sentences like shaking coins into a jar. The sound comforts us. I said, "I think the thing wanted him and found me more interesting. I think it followed water and hunger as straight as a road. I think he ran until he fell. I think a man can die in 3 places at once, where his body stops, where his fear finds home, and where people decide what to call him." She nodded. "So you killed the thing," she said. "I killed the thing," I said. "He is still gone. If there's a moral, it's not the one that sells fast. I did not learn that superstition saves you or that faith is foolish. I learned that sometimes you listen the first time an unfashionable voice tells you rain can carry a predator. I learned that strangers will argue about your choices on your behalf until their throats hurt. I learned that ending a threat is not the same as undoing the harm it has already done. I stayed the rest of that season. When the clouds built, I sometimes put my hand on the lightning cable at the church. Not like a saint touching a relic, but like a mechanic considering a tool he hopes never to use again. The boy occasionally met me in the plaza, and we would count the seconds between the flash and the sound and try to guess where. Exactly. The sky ended and the town began. When I finally flew home at the edge of the dry season, Estelí spread under the wing like a quilt that had told me a story and now deserved sleep. I thought about the Americans I know who would hear this and say, "Why didn't you call the police earlier? Why didn't you pursue therapy protocols? Why didn't you publish? Why didn't you?" Because I had a choice and I made it. And it cost what choices cost. Because a man begged and I was the one who heard him. Because sometimes the only way to stop something that wakes only when it rains is to stand in the rain and ask it to come closer. I have not dreamed like that since. When it rains where I live now, the water on the glass sounds like applause from very far away. I am not brave. I am a listener who, for one evening, learned how to speak loudly enough to be heard by the thing that needed to hear me. If you have read this far, you understand what I promised at the start. I'm not drunk. I am steady enough to tell you the worst parts and the part that matters most. We did not lose everyone. We lost one man whose neighbors will say his name in kitchens for another season yet. We lost a measure of ignorance about what rain can carry. We replaced it with a knowledge that fits in the hollow of your throat when thunder arrives. There are violences we do not see until they put their hands on our doors. There are injustices we perpetuate when we ignore the voices that warn us, because those voices don't sound like ours. What would you have done if it were your plaza, your bell tower, your boy under the arcade? What debt do we owe to strangers who suffer where we cannot see them? Is violence ever clean when it pretends to be justice? I want you to tell me. I want you to argue with me about the difference between stopping a threat and fixing the harm that made it, and whether a death you choose is braver than a life you flee. Add your voice. Take a side. Name the injustice you see in this and the violence you refuse to excuse. Tell me what you would have done in the rain.